Welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Wednesday, February 16th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. Many of the stories read here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryNews.com. Here are the news stories for the day from the Associated Press and other Native news sources. A San Carlos Apache, Arizona police officer has passed away after a trailer collided with his vehicle. A spokesman for the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs says 26-year-old officer Aaron Peru was headed to a meeting February 13th when a trailer came off a hitch and struck his vehicle on U.S. 70 in eastern Arizona. The Arizona Republic reports Peru was a San Carlos Apache police officer for only 30 days. Officials say a chimney fire at a White Swan residence started the wildfire that destroyed 20 homes on the Yakama Indian Reservation. Yakama Nation Fire Management Officer Don Jones told the Yakama Herald Republic that winds were blowing so hard that water from fire hoses was blown away from reaching the flames of the 230-acre fire. The fire was contained Sunday, February 13th, but continued to smolder at a log pile at the Genwen wood chipping plant. Authorities said the chimney fire spread to nearby trees and bushes about 1:30 p.m. on Saturday. Winds estimated at 50 miles an hour with gusts of more than 70 miles an hour quickly fanned the flames. Walker, a fire district veteran of 27 years, called it by far the county's most devastating fire. And Indian Country TV expects to have a 40-minute tour of the White Swan fire posted later this evening, as contributed to us by Darla Leslie on assignment for the Yakama Nation Review, tribal newspaper, and the Yakama Nation government to record the damage from the fire. Construction of a state office building in downtown Logan, West Virginia, has hit another delay. Mayor Serafino Noletti told the Logan Banner that the discovery of Native American bones at the site will delay construction for at least another 3 weeks. Noletti says the state plans to send an archaeologist to monitor digging at the site until excavation work is completed. And today we speak with Shoshone Bannock correspondent Mark Trahant about the president's budget, the congressional, and several other budget proposals coming from Washington, D.C., all with major cuts in programs and what seems to be a proverbial showdown of political wills coming up. The question will be, will the government be shut down in the next 3 weeks over these political disputes? The state of Wisconsin has already put its National Guard on call in case of disruptive activities there over state budget disputes. Mark Trahant, the President of the United States, has issued his budget proposal for the next budgetary process between the Republicans, the Democrats, the President, and everyone else. There's so many numbers to keep track of. Tell me a little bit about how you figure that all out.
First of all, it kind of took the numbers to keep off with the National Congress of American Indians presenting what they thought would be an ideal budget. Then the president's budget, and after that we'll get the congressional budget. So those three, and it's interesting, NCAI starts on what everyone would like. The president's budget, I would say, is not bad. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. And then the congressional budget is going to be a disaster. Further complicating all of this is we still haven't got a budget for this year, and we're halfway into the year.
Tell us about how that process is taking place. Why don't we have a budget in place, and when are the cutoff dates for when this has got to happen? Isn't that coming up here shortly?
Yeah, the continuing resolution expires March 4th, and that's when it's going to get really interesting. It's going to really boil down to who blinks first. The president told the Congress just yesterday that if they pass the kind of draconian cuts they're talking about, he'll veto them. And if they veto it, it could shut the government down while they try to come up with some sort of compromise. How long the government gets shut down, I think, is an open question. You have to remember that some of these folks don't care about that. They're really so driven by their ideology that they like the idea of shutting the government down. And that has huge implications. Everything from general assistance checks to operating of clinics could be closed during some period of time.
Well, let's take, for example, the state of Wisconsin. The governor, they're in the midst right now. The GOP dominated legislature in Wisconsin. Sounds like they're going to bring an end to arbitration and collective bargaining for the employee unions, teachers and other people in the
Right.
state of Wisconsin. And if that ends, there's already apparently some sick outs today and demonstrations in the state, and the governor simply says we'll just have we got the National Guard ready in case there's disruptions, and they'll run government for a while, I guess, if things come to pass. Are those kinds of options on the table at the national level as well?
I think it really is in this new environment. I mean, really, we're at this point where there are two very, very different conflicting views of where the country should go. And I'm not sure how to reconcile those views. One of the things I've been wrestling with is, in fact, I heard a great version of this by the writer Sherman Alexie, and that is the concept of duality, where you hold competing ideas in your head. And one of those competing ideas is that to get out of this recession, we need to spend more money. On the other hand, long term, we need to save and cut back on spending. But those two things cannot be done at once, and the Republicans are intent on doing them at once. If they make the kind of cuts they're talking about, we're talking about laying off in the government 1 million people. And what that will do to the economy is really deeply, deeply disturbing.
It sounds like it's disturbing at a time when there's this huge unemployment to have that many people in government laid off. Raises a whole bunch of issues, I guess.
Especially in rural and native communities. I mean, you look at what it would do to a community where unemployment ranges from 30 to 50%, and it could, without social services to back that up, it could have very deep human consequences.
Someone's just saying this is the medicine that we have to take to get there. Conventional wisdom would say that you spend your way out of recession. These guys are going in the opposite direction. Is there any chance that somehow whatever they're doing to save basically they're saving deficits, deficit spending. People aren't going to find a lot more money in their pocket because of these types of actions. What they're going to do is see a lot less government involvement in everything. Again, at the tribal level, people may say, well, we don't really notice that other than in terms of employment and everything, but budget cuts on education Pell Grants, budget cuts on other things. Where do you see this going down? You said it's going to be a willpower thing. The president, Congress, who bends first? Is there middle ground?
Well, the middle ground to me is recognizing that we have a long-term problem that's separate from our short-term problem. Long-term, and that's coming up very quickly in the next few years, interest will exceed gross domestic product. And so something has to be done by that. And one of the great ironies in all of this is when you talk about long-term entitlements, you're talking about a system that an older, graying America that's largely white has to be paid for by a younger population that's incredibly diverse. And at the same time, that older population is cutting off benefits for that diverse population. And so that tension between age and demographics, I think, is going to be huge.
Well, and there seems to be a change in that demographics too. It's much broader, it's more diverse, but isn't it much less lower wage earning? There's so fewer manufacturing union jobs where you used to get paid $18 to $26 an hour, and what do you have now? You got Walmart, you got people at fast food joints and those kinds of wage earners, rather than these huge. What's happening to the middle class? Is it even going to exist in the next few years? Is a question that some people seem to be asking.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I think we have to fight hard for the president's budget, invest money in education. And you look at different wage sectors, the only people who actually had money grow in their pocket is those with college educations. And even then it was only 3%. But workers without college educations in the last few years dropped their income levels by 8%. And that number has continued to decline. This country is going through this huge demographic change. And in order to be competitive in the world, it requires an intellectual workforce. There's no question about it. I mean, we still make things. We still have a higher percentage of manufacturing than any other country in the world. The only thing is more of that manufacturing is made by machines, not people.
Indeed. And on the reservation, where do we go for some relief if we even need it? I mean, we've always said that some of these things don't impact the reservation communities. How do we address these things? Do we just sit down and have to brainstorm about surviving and getting along and within our own small little communities?
I think it's important that tribes do brainstorm right now, tomorrow. One of the things I would encourage tribes to think about is coming up with short-term funds that can be used to help people if the general assistance program completely evaporates, so that people don't starve. And I think tribes are going to be the last resort on this area. I think tribes are going to have to look at, as revenues constrict from the federal government, how many employees they can keep on and what to do to mitigate that. Maybe finding other money, looking for other sources, maybe not having per capita, but turning that money back into government. Another thing that tribes could do is start building money in foundations. I think every tribe, there ought to be a Shoshone Bannock tribal foundation that has money that can be spent on anything, and 501c3 under tribal law. And I think that's just critical because the federal government is not going to be there the way it's been in the last really century, but certainly since Roosevelt.
You're literally saying that some of our tribal communities need to sit down and think about how they might be able to feed themselves.
Yeah. I think self-sufficiency is critical.
And this is where some of the forethought of some of our forefathers, people who signed treaties to preserve hunting and fishing rights and bases for the reservation being in areas where people have fish or other resources, seems to be paying off. Somewhere along in that whole philosophy, they says, how are our grandchildren and great-grandchildren going to be able to feed themselves in the future? And it might be coming to some extent to that point where we have to figure out how to do this stuff for ourselves.
Absolutely. In fact, my poem today, News Rhymes for
You got to move over.
line,
You got to move into the center there a little bit. Thank you.
Sorry, was along those lines because it's amazing how quickly we see in the world right now governments falling. And there's no guarantee that the United States is forever. But the hope in all of this is that Trump people have lasted for 10,000 years. And we need to make sure we'll last another 10,000 years no matter what the structure is around us.
People are resilient and survivors over the long haul on this thing.
Yeah.
You said it might provide some opportunities for tribal government to go locally, counties, tribes. What kind of services
Absolutely.
are we talking about? Consolidation of fire departments, police departments, roadworks, all those public services, in other words. The question was intergovernmental potential consolidation of local services between tribes and other governments.
I think there's a great opportunity there. For example, the old jurisdiction debate that has been very contentious. As county governments go through downsizing, they're going to look for help. And if tribes could help them, I think there might be some opportunity there to reshape the whole jurisdiction argument. Another one might be rural health care. Why have two systems in place when we're that stretched? Maybe tribes could take non-Indian customers into the health system as paying clients and as a win-win for everybody.
What's the next step in the process? What are we looking at in D.C. time-wise? What are you going to be looking at here?
The next 3 or 4 weeks are going to be really telling. The two issues coming up are the end of the continuing resolution and then the debt ceiling. And both of those will be very contentious and, again, coming down to who blinks first in Congress.
We'll keep in touch with you, Mark. Appreciate your time.
Very good.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. Miigwech for joining with us. Come back again soon.